Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So as you can see, I am very much ready for fall. I have not gotten out the fall backgroundy things yet, mostly because I'm lazy, not because I don't believe in decorating before October, because I'm ready for colder weather. But I'm going to be doing the Under the Influence of Booktube tag today. I was tagged by Olive, who created the tag. I will link her video down below if you haven't seen it. This is a really fun tag that's just sort of about how our community influences us. So I'm really excited about this one, and let's just jump right in. Question one is a twofold question. So first, to name a book that you read off of the recommendation of another booktuber. I get a ton of recommendations from Sam from Sam's Nonsense. I read the entire Farseer trilogy on her recommendation and absolutely love them. And I've also been reading the Inda series as well. I have one book left in those. Those are a little bit, to me, denser, but also really fun. So I have gotten into a lot of like longer fantasy series and like thick fantasy books because of Sam. So yes, I've really enjoyed all of those so far. And the second part of this question is to name a book that you were talked out of reading because of another booktuber. And I have thought about this quite a bit, and I am not, one doesn't come to mind right off the bat, and maybe that's just because once I decide not to read a book, I just sort of forget about it. I would say that the numerous kind of bad and good reviews, both the good and the bad reviews of A Little Life, have really kept me from being interested in it at all. I was never really interested in it in the first place. It was one of those books that was super hyped and I was like, maybe. But then the more I hear people talk about it, and that be that a good review or a bad review, the more I have no interest in reading that at all. I will say that Mercedes video on that book, and I will link that down below because I laughed so hard, definitely sealed the deal in me not wanting to read that book. The second question is about genre. So is there a genre that you either changed your mind about or that you discovered because of Booktube? And I would say absolutely science fiction. So before Booktube, I wasn't really into science fiction. I read some fantasy, but still not a lot of fantasy either. But definitely science fiction intimidated me. My husband has always been a big science fiction reader, but I still wasn't super interested in the things that he was recommended to me. But the more that I found channels like Rachel from Colonnati or Books in Pieces, I started to hear about books that sounded interesting to me that had that were in the science fiction genre. So things like A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, Behind the Throne, those kind of things were stepping stones into science fiction for me. And then now I will read some of the blurbs on science fiction books and think, this sounds great. Whereas I feel like a few years ago, before Booktube, I may have read those and not been interested, or wouldn't have even bothered to read them because I would have thought that science fiction just wasn't for me, which is absolutely not the case. So I will link quite a few science fiction and fantasy booktubers down below. Winks from Winks and Ink, her book bath box also was a big part in me kind of branching out in science fiction as well. Question 3 is about how much time did you spend on YouTube before Booktube, and how much time do you spend on Booktube or YouTube now? I, like a lot of people, found Booktube through the beauty community. So if you go way back on my channel, you'll see some hilarious like Birchbox unboxings, perfume collection video, all kinds of stuff that's beauty related, because that's what I was interested in when I first kind of found YouTube. And I was spending probably less time than I spend now, but still a considerable amount of time on YouTube back then, watching beauty gurus, I'm trying to think if I watched vlog videos, would probably be the other thing I was gonna say. I don't think I watched anything really other than beauty videos, but I did watch a lot of vlog videos too, which I still continue to watch beauty videos and vlog videos. I just don't follow all of the same channels that I followed then. And then a larger part of my watching has now been dedicated to Booktube channels. So I would say roughly the same amount of time. I definitely watch 1, maybe 2 hours of Booktube a day. Depending on the day, I would say on the weekends I watch more, and I tend to watch Booktube in the morning when I'm like eating my breakfast or kind of like getting ready for work, just because I don't really want to sit down and read something, or I need to be doing something else, so I'm like listening to videos at the same time as I'm doing other things. And then I tend to do my reading in the evenings and a little bit of Booktube watching then, but it really just depends on my mood, honestly. Question 4 asks, how many books did you read per year or per month before you were on Booktube? I used to keep a shelf on Goodreads for each year. I would move the books that I read in that year over to that shelf. This was before they did the challenges, I think, or sometimes I just didn't do the challenges. I don't even know. But that's how I used to keep track of how many books I read in a year. So I looked back at that, and I started Booktube in 2014. And the first year I was on Booktube, I read, I think, 29 books that year. Before that, the most books I'd ever read was 26 in a year, and then the other years were anywhere between like 8 and 16. So probably, I would say average, I read about 12 books in a year, so 1 book a month, which is completely different now that I am doing Booktube. And I probably read closer to 50 or 60 books in a year, which would have been insane to me back in 2008, 2009, 2010, because I always considered myself a slow reader, and I would have never anticipated being able to read books as quickly as I do now. Plus, I also wasn't listening to audiobooks at all. Well, actually, that's probably not true. I think some of those 12 or 8 books were audiobooks. But really, it just comes down to the more you read, the faster you read, and that was something that just would have been a mind-boggling concept to me, you know, 10 years ago. But I have found that that is the case for me. So like now I can read a book in 4 days that probably would have taken me a month to read before. So that has been an interesting development, and I think part of it, you know, being on Booktube and talking about books and finding so many more books that I'm interested in has contributed to me wanting to read more often and making reading more of a priority in my day-to-day life. Whereas I was always a reader before, and I actually had a fashion blog for a number of years and always had a monthly currently reading post on that blog where I talked about the things that I was reading. So I've always sort of been sharing what I've been reading, and I've been on Goodreads since the year that Goodreads started, and so I've always been tracking my reading since that point, but I just was not reading as quickly or as frequently as I read now. 5 is very interesting, which is, has Booktube affected your book buying habits, and are you happy or not with that development? Yes and no. I would say that what Booktube has done as far as my book buying habits is it's made me more aware of it. So I buy more books now than I used to, but that's also, I can chalk that up to also reading more than I used to. Because I always was like going into a bookstore and buying a bunch of books and then not reading them right away, which is why I have books on my shelf that have been there for a while, for years. I would oftentimes see things that were like 30 books that you should read before you turn 30, and then I would go buy a bunch of those and then just never read them. Or I would think I should read these classics, and then I would go buy them and then never read them. Or I would find an author I really liked, buy all of their books, and read through them. But now I find that I am a little bit more picky about the books that I choose. So I hear about so many books that on any given day I can go into a bookstore and I can look at a shelf and I can pinpoint books that I've heard about. And so you would think that that would mean that I would be gravitating towards those books more often, but what actually ends up happening is a lot of times I go into a bookstore and I see those books, I point them out and say, oh hey, you know, I heard about this book here, this book there. Sometimes I'll pick up those books because they're things that I've heard good reviews about and I want to read. But something that has stayed consistent for me all the way through today, so this is something that has not changed about my book buying habits, which I'm happy to say it hasn't, is that I still go into a bookstore looking for things that I have never heard of. So I may buy a couple of books that I've heard about on Booktube or that have interested me because I have seen them on Bookstagram, but I really enjoy the experience of going into bookstores and just starting at one end of a bookshelf and making my way all the way down across all of them, pulling out books and reading blurbs and just picking up things that interest me, that the blurb interests me, that the premise or the writing style interests me. I would say the one thing I have become more aware of since Booktube that has sort of changed a little bit of how I go about that choosing books to read the blurbs is that I'm more aware of publishers. So I've started to realize that certain publishers publish certain types of books or certain types of authors that I gravitate more towards. So it has sort of changed the way that I kind of look at a bookshelf and which books that I am drawn to pull off the shelf and read the blurb. But I still tend to choose books that I either haven't heard about or I've heard very little about, just because I still really enjoy the experience of reading something no one's ever heard of and loving or hating it, and not having any kind of preconceived notion about the book that I'm reading. Because that is something that when I do choose those books that other people are talking about, a lot of the times I will go in with a preconceived notion about it, and then I feel like that affects the way that I read the book or affects the way that I feel about it, or makes me feel like, oh, I should feel this way about it, but I don't, so I have an unpopular opinion, when really it's just my opinion. So I would say that yes, it has changed the way that I shop for books, but not in a really drastic way, in the sort of more aware and kind of thoughtful way of how I shop for books. The sixth question is, has a review from another booktuber ever retroactively made you change your mind about a book? I genuinely cannot think of a book where I had my mind changed retroactively. So there are definitely times that I have read a book and really enjoyed it and then had other people talk about it and then made me think, huh, I missed that, or oh yeah, that is super problematic and I didn't catch that the first time. So I would say that Booktube has opened my eyes to notice things sometimes in books that I have read in the past, and then made me think a little bit more about why I felt the way I did about it, or made me think, oh, interesting, I didn't catch that and maybe I should have. Next time I need to think a little bit more thoughtfully about those kind of topics. But I can't think of anything that I retroactively have gone back and been like, oh, I loved that book, now I hate it. Or, oh, I really didn't like that book, but this person's opinion made me remember why I should have, or anything like that. So no, I've never really gone back and thought about a book differently. I will say that, as I mentioned in the last question, that listening to people talk about books has caused me to go into books with a sort of preconceived notion. So I think that other people's reviews and other people's comments do affect the way I think about a book while I'm reading it sometimes, but never retroactively. Question 7 is, have you ever been inspired by someone else's video to make a similar video, or been inspired by their style or organization or anything like that? And yes, absolutely. I think that's one of the great things about this community, is that we are all constantly being inspired by each other in the content that we create. I used to do, back when I still did standalone book reviews, I used to do something called 4 Reasons Why You Should Read This Book, and I got that from Between Chapters channel. She did something similar to that, and I thought it was really great and a really easy way to quote approach reviewing, because I hate reviewing standalone books. I much prefer just casual wrap-ups, which is why that's sort of gone away, is because I just don't enjoy that. But when I was doing reviews, that was the format that I chose to do them in, and I definitely got that from her channel. For a while there, I also was doing the book vlogs like Helene from Helene Jepsen. I really like that format. I just found it to be hard to keep up with every month. So I'm always just constantly impressed by hers, that she can remember to talk about each book once she finishes it. I just was not finding that easy for me to keep up with on a daily basis, but I was definitely inspired by her to do that. And I constantly am inspired by the aesthetic of other people's videos. I just love watching and seeing how, you know, what people choose to have as their backgrounds, things like that. I'm constantly inspired by mostly beauty YouTubers when it comes to makeup, because I really like playing with makeup. I don't always wear makeup in my videos just because that's not important to me, and I don't wear makeup on a daily basis. Like, if I wore makeup to work, people would probably ask me where I was going or think I was going to an interview, because I just don't wear makeup on a daily basis. But like today, I was inspired to put on makeup by watching Sam from Thoughts on Tomes, one of her recent videos, just because she always does such beautiful makeup. And I was like, I feel like putting on makeup today, and I'm gonna go for it. So yeah, I definitely am inspired by all kinds of people on not only the Booktube platform, but also just the YouTube platform in general. 8 is, what are some pressures that you feel in your reading life because of your channel? And I would definitely say I do feel the pressure to read on like a steady basis. So I have not really been in a reading mood lately, so I haven't been picking up really anything, and I do feel like a little just pressure or guilt at the back of my brain that's like, you should be reading, you should be reading. But I'm trying very hard not to kind of fall prey to that, just because, you know, reading is fun and I want it to stay fun, and I don't want this to be to feel tedious or like something I have to do. So that's something that I am constantly trying to combat. And then I always feel just talking about the books can feel a little anxiety inducing a little bit, because when I've just finished a book, and this is why I really liked the vlog style wrap-ups, because when I've just finished a book, it's very fresh on my mind and I have a lot to say, and I often am like chattering at my husband about what I think about certain parts, or why I didn't like the writing style, or how it could have been better. But by the time I get to a wrap-up setting, so I want to wrap up at least 3 books at a time, typically the first or second of those books I don't remember as well, or I definitely don't feel as strongly as I felt when I had just finished it. And so I always, once I've talked about a book and then when I'm editing it, I remember all these things I wish I'd said, but I'm not going to go back and redo it. So I always do feel a little bit of pressure to sound intelligent about the way that I talk about books. And I just feel like when I'm doing it in kind of a like retroactive way instead of when I've finished the book, that I don't feel like I come off as eloquent or as if I'm thinking as critically about the books as I do when I'm having those conversations with my husband. So that's more frustrating to me than anything, and it's less a pressure that I feel like the channel puts on me than it is kind of an anxiety or a pressure I put on myself. So question 9 is, in what way has the social part of the community impacted your reading, and do you think about books differently? So I would say I definitely think about books differently. Just the discussions and conversations and other people's opinions out there now has really made me think a little bit more critically about books. It's definitely made me consider what I really like in books and be able to easily pinpoint that, or helped me to identify why I don't like something instead of just being like, I don't like this. It's made me think like, oh, I don't like this because there's not enough character development. I don't like this because it's literally one string of battles after another, or I don't like this because this is, the language in it is just not approachable. Things like that. So it's definitely helped me understand what I don't like about things and what I like about books. But it's also made me think about literature in terms of current events, in terms of diverse communities and that kind of thing. So it's definitely helped me to be a more critical reader. Now, when it comes to the social part of the community, I will be the first to tell you that I am not good at that. I'm really not. And that's not because I don't want to be, it's because I have social anxiety and I am just not good at stepping out and kind of like being that person that approaches people first. Like, I have a handful of friends on Booktube, but we are not the kind of people, or those friendships are not the kind of friendships where like I am texting that person every day, or where I am talking to them on the phone or talking to them through social media, just because that's not the kind of person I am. Even my best friends in the world will go weeks without having any kind of conversation, and then we just pick up like we were just having a conversation. So in some ways I feel like I miss out on the community because that is the type of person that I am, and that is just sort of how all of my relationships are. But at the same time, I don't think that everybody's social interactions with this platform and with each other has to be the same. And I think that's important to say and to talk about, because sometimes I think other people are like me and feel like they're a little bit left out because they aren't constantly having those conversations. They aren't constantly buddy reading. They aren't constantly carrying on a Voxer chat or a text message group chat with other people on the platform, and that's perfectly fine. You can have established friendships without being in constant contact. Like I kind of want to voice that just because I feel like somebody else probably feels the same way I do and feels like they aren't making friends on the platform, when that's really not the case. You just aren't, you're making friendships in your own way. So I will say I've met some really great people, and every time I interact with those people, it's a wonderful thing, and it brings joy and light to my day, to my week. So yeah. And 10 is, what influence do you hope that your channel has on Booktube or on the community? And I don't know that I've really thought about it in terms of influence. I mean, I hope that somebody finds a book they love and they want to read and they want to talk about because I read it and I talked about it. I think that's always been something that I have been very excited when somebody reaches out and says, hey, I read this book because of you. My channel is not just books. I also talk about tea and other things. I love doing vlogs. So I do hope that other creators see that you don't have to just do one thing, that you can talk about other things and you can enjoy what you enjoy and share what you want to share, and that people care and people will watch. I love hearing when people have read something that I've recommended or something that I've read and talked about, but I also really love it when people send me screenshots of their, or not screenshots, but pictures of the tea that they're drinking, or tell me, hey, I made an order for this tea company because you talked about them. Just because I really like helping other people find what makes them happy. So bringing joy to other people's lives, through helping them find something to bring them joy. So that has always been what it's been about to me, is just like doing what I enjoy doing, having fun doing it, and making somebody else smile or making somebody else happy, even if it's just for 5 minutes, or let's be real guys, like 25 minutes, because all my videos are obscenely long. So those are all the questions. I will probably tag people down below. Definitely want to tag the people that I have already mentioned in this video, just because I think this is a really fun conversation to have on Booktube. So it's a tag that creates conversation, and I love that. Olive is forever creative, and if you don't subscribe to her channel, you should. She's wonderful. Speaking of people who bring joy to my life. But yes, so I will link her video down below. I'll link the people I talked about, and then I definitely encourage anybody who hasn't done this video to do it, and I will tag some people down below as well. Anyways, I hope you guys are having a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!